Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has finally said he believes the firebombing of a Melbourne synagogue in the early hours of Friday morning was a terror attack. The admission came after widespread condemnation for his lack of leadership in dealing with anti-Semitism.
If you want my personal view, quite clearly, terrorism is something that is aimed at creating fear in the community, and the atrocities that occurred at the synagogue in Melbourne clearly were designed to create fear in the community and therefore, from my personal perspective, certainly fulfil that definition of terrorism.
The Prime Minister also announced he would visit the Ripponlea Synagogue to meet with the Jewish community on Tuesday. He was in Perth opening a train line today.
Meanwhile, 1,000 Melbourne Jews held a vigil outside the charred remains of their synagogue to protest anti-Semitism. But Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen, who on Friday had insisted she stood with the Jewish community, was a no-show. James, 2 days too long. 2 days too long. And let's be honest, the Prime Minister is only just coming out and saying this now because he's under significant pressure. He's been under pressure from the coalition, from media, from the Jewish community. He's been on the front of all the papers, people saying, what are you doing? And, you know, he doesn't have the instinct and the goal, the natural instinct in the first place, as a good leader would, to come out and condemn this properly with gusto from the very, very beginning. He hasn't done that. It's like he has to think about politics or think about the politics in the words that he says before the moral clarity. Meanwhile, this guy is still over in Western Australia. He flies over on Friday. He should have cancelled that trip. He should have been in Melbourne on Friday with the Jewish community. And what's worse, now he's got to wait until Tuesday. He's not even bringing it forward.
Don't forget, this is a Prime Minister who has actually been praised by Hamas, no less, for his government's policy on the Middle East. And you're absolutely right. The reflex reaction of a Prime Minister to something like this should be immediately. You drop everything, you get there, you demand law enforcement take action, you are there in solidarity with the people who are clearly living in fear. For him to not get there until Tuesday, I mean, whatever you've got going on in Perth, it's a railway line. You get back to Victoria. There were 1,000 people in that vigil today. Anthony Albanese wasn't there, despite the fact he's saying, remember his new election campaign catchphrase?
Please.
I've got your back.
Oh.
Well, not 4 days later, you don't. And as you mentioned, the Victorian Premier wasn't there at all. Now, she did show up the other day and she left very, very quickly because everybody didn't pat her on the back and say, oh, thanks for your help. They challenged her, where have you guys been? How's it gotten to this point? We've had 12 months of this. It continues and we're still getting mealy-mouthed words. She didn't show up today, any wonder?
Yeah, and, you know, the Prime Minister, it's all well and good to say, oh, we no anti-Semitism, we do not accept anti-Semitism.
Yeah, we've heard that all year.
But what have you done, Prime Minister, to actually stamp out anti-Semitism in this country? And what bothered me the most on Friday, James, is he said, well, anti-Semitism's been around for a long time. OK, sure. But you know when it started in this country? It started on the steps of the Sydney Opera House 2 days after the October 7 massacre 2023, and it has been a revolving door ever since then. That's when it started, and there has been no leadership. It's been weak silence, all for the sake of sandbagging votes.
Yeah. Peter Dutton had a great... Well, I was going to say it was a great line, but I don't believe Peter Dutton's trying to come up with great lines. Peter Dutton's just being a decent person at this point. And he said there's no question Anthony Albanese's inaction on anti-Semitism has led to this firebombing. That's a big claim, but I mean, the evidence backs it up. And it's exactly what Benjamin Netanyahu said just a couple of days ago, that the government policies were enabling and empowering anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and we've got some audio as well of Josh Frydenberg, former Liberal Treasurer, yesterday making a passionate plea. But what stumped me the most is have a listen to Murray Watt straight after that, what he said about Josh Frydenberg's comments. Have a look at this.
The first thing the Prime Minister needs to do is he and his government need to declare yesterday's attack at the Adass Synagogue a terrorist event. Please, Prime Minister, see what is happening, understand what is happening, and act. We don't have months, we don't have years, we have got weeks, days to restore security and safety for the Australian Jewish community and for all Australians.
Yeah, well, I mean, Josh Frydenberg would have his own political reasons for making these types of comments. As I say, I think any fair observer of the way the Prime Minister and our government have handled these matters would see that he has every single time called out these types of events as being anti-Semitic, un-Australian and inappropriate. And as I say, not only has he said those things, but he's taken action.
Let's not forget that Josh Frydenberg is a Jewish man. Let's not forget he has a faith. To come out and say he's only doing this for political reasons is appalling.
But talk about pot kettle black. You want to talk about people treating this whole incident as political. For the last 12 months, that's all Labor have done. They've had one eye on Western Sydney votes and they've made foreign policy accordingly. So for Murray Watt to accuse Josh Frydenberg of making those statements out of political gain, for political gain, that's what Labor have been doing this whole time.
It's absolutely unacceptable.